The last message the Voakai sent was not a request. It was not a warning. It was a list, 7 items long. Each one told humanity what it had to give up, what it had to stop building, and where it was no longer allowed to go. The message ended with a single line. You have 30 rotations to comply. After that, we will remind you of your place. The Voakai were old, older than most civilizations in the galactic conquered could count. Their ships were the size of small moons. Their history stretched back so far that the birth of their empire predated human agriculture. They had ended wars before they started, absorbed smaller species into client states, and rewritten conquered law so many times that no one alive remembered what the original version said. They were, by every measure, the most powerful force in known space. And they had just declared war on humanity. Ambassador Rhea Solis read the message twice. She was sitting alone in the communication room of Orbital Platform 7 above Earth, and the room was very quiet. Outside the window, the planet turned slowly, blue and white, and entirely unaware. She read the list again. Then she set the message down on the table and looked out at the clouds below. She smiled. It was a small smile, the kind a person makes when something they have been waiting a long time for finally arrives. Not a happy smile, exactly. More like the smile of someone who has just heard a familiar knock at the door. Her aide, a young man named Dav, was standing near the door. He had read the message over her shoulder. His face was pale. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "they mean it. 11 species have already confirmed support for the coalition. We are looking at a war on 17 fronts." Rhea nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "We should contact the Defense Council immediately." "I already sent the signal," she said, "before I read it the second time." Dav stared at her. "You knew what it said before you finished reading it." She did not answer that directly. Instead, she stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked to the window. Below, a storm was forming over the Southern Ocean, big and slow and certain. The Voakai had spent 40 years watching humanity. They had cataloged human ships, mapped human colonies, measured human military output, and calculated human threat potential. Their conclusion, filed in the Grand Conquered Intelligence Archive, was that humanity posed a manageable nuisance. Ambitious, they wrote, but limited, emotional and short-lived. A species that spent enormous energy arguing with itself. A species that had only been in space for 2 centuries, and still had not learned how small it truly was. What the Voakai had not done was ask why humanity had been so quiet. 2 centuries is not a long time for a silicon-based species that lives for thousands of years. But for humans, 2 centuries is 6 or 7 full generations. It is enough time to build something very large, very carefully, and tell almost no one about it. Rhea thought about her grandmother, who had worked in a deep space construction yard her entire adult life, and never once told her family what she was building. She thought about the teachers in the border colonies who ran emergency defense drills disguised as physical education. She thought about the shipping manifests she had reviewed 2 years ago, manifests that listed agricultural equipment bound for colony worlds that had no agriculture yet. She thought about a document she had read before she ever became an ambassador. It was old and classified and stamped with a seal she was not supposed to have clearance for. It was titled, simply, "Contingency Doctrine, in case they ever try." Someone had written it 183 years ago. Someone who understood that humanity's greatest strength had never been its weapons. It had always been its patience. Dav was still waiting for an answer. Outside, the storm below was growing. "Tell the Defense Council the clock has started," Rhea said, "and tell them she smiled." Dav frowned. "Tell them who smiled." "They will know what it means." She turned from the window and walked out of the room. Behind her, the Voakai ultimatum sat on the table, 7 items long, absolutely certain of its own power. 30 rotations. That was what the Voakai had given humanity. It would not take that long. Nobody told the Voakai about the caves. Not the caves on Earth, though there were plenty of those. The caves under the mountains of Ardes III, the carved-out cores of dead asteroids in the Kellen Belt, the sealed underground levels of 17 colony stations that showed on no public map and appeared on no conquered registry. The Volcae had excellent spies. They had sensors that could read thermal signatures through solid rock, but their spies had been looking for warships and weapons factories. They had not been looking for rooms full of quiet people, doing very slow, very careful work across multiple generations. Defense Coordinator Harlan Osa had spent 31 years of his life in those rooms. He was not a soldier. He had never fired a weapon in his life. He was the kind of man who read old documents and drew connections and kept very detailed records of things other people had forgotten. When Rhea's signal arrived, he was already underground, already waiting, already looking at the same situation board he had updated every single day for the last decade. He brought Rhea down himself. The facility was 6 levels below a grain processing plant in the Highlands. The elevator took 3 minutes. Neither of them spoke during the ride. At the bottom, the doors opened into a long white room lit by cool overhead panels. 30 people sat at stations along the walls. They were not rushing. They were not panicking. They moved with the calm of people executing a plan they had rehearsed so many times it had become ordinary. Harlan walked Rhea to the center display. It showed human space in full, every colony, every relay station, every shipping lane. And layered over all of it in a second color were things that did not appear on any public chart. "How many people know about this?" Rhea asked. "The full picture. About 400. Pieces of it maybe a few thousand. We kept it compartmentalized. Ambassadors specifically were kept out of it. If you do not know, you cannot accidentally reveal it and you stay believable." Rhea looked at the display for a long time without speaking. There were marks in the asteroid belts, hundreds of them. There were symbols over weather stations she had flown past dozens of times. There was a line threading through every single human trade route she had ever used, annotated with a word she did not recognize. "What is the Shepherd Fleet?" she asked. 600 warships, Harlan said. Cold-powered, minimal emissions, parked in asteroid belts across 7 systems. The Volcae scanned for active drive signatures. We gave them nothing to find. Every ship has been sitting dark for between 8 and 40 years. Rhea turned to look at him. 40 years. Some of the crews rotated out twice. The ship stayed. She turned back to the display. The weather stations. Orbital siege platforms. 14 of them. The weather equipment is real, it actually works, but it sits on top of something considerably more serious. They have been in place for 19 years. No conquered inspection has ever flagged them because no inspection team thought to look at the load-bearing substructure. Rhea put her hand on the edge of the display table and steadied herself. Not from fear. From the sheer accumulated weight of what she was looking at. Generations of people who had built things and said nothing. Generations of people who had gone to work every day inside a secret that could not be shared with their families, their neighbors, or their own government's public-facing officials. "There is one more thing," Harlan said. He pulled up a secondary window. It showed a simple diagram of the human interstellar relay system, the network of communication nodes that connected every human world and station. When we built the relay network, we embedded something inside its architecture. Every node carries an encrypted file package. The files cannot be accessed or deleted from outside the network. They are tied to a trigger condition. What trigger? A formal declaration of war against humanity by any conquered member or coalition thereof. Rhea looked at the file package label. It read, "Accord Trap." "What is inside it?" 4,000 years of Volcae conduct, Harlan said simply. Every treaty violation, every bribe paid to conquered arbiters, every resource transfer extracted from client species under duress. The quiet removal of 2 pre-spaceflight civilizations from the historical record. All of it documented, authenticated, cross-referenced with public conquered records, so it cannot be dismissed as fabrication. He paused. The moment a declaration of war is filed, every relay node broadcasts the full package to every receiving antenna in explored space simultaneously. The room was very quiet. They do not know, Rhea said. It was not a question. They have no reason to suspect it. They have never fought a species that spent 2 centuries preparing for them specifically. Rhea looked at the map for another long moment. 600 cold ships waiting in the dark. 14 platforms wearing the faces of weather stations. A bomb hidden inside the infrastructure of communication itself, set to go off the moment the Volkai pulled the trigger they were so confident about. How long has this been ready? She asked. Harlan checked nothing. He already knew. 183 years, 4 months, and 11 days. Rhea exhaled slowly. My grandmother, she said quietly, almost to herself. Her team built the first relay node with the Accord trap embedded in it, yes, Harlan said. She never told anyone outside the program. Rhea looked at the display one final time. Then she straightened up and turned toward the door. How long until the Volkai declaration is filed? She asked. 19 rotations, give or take. Then we wait, she said. We have always been good at that. Volkai filed the declaration at the 43rd second of the 31st rotation. It was a formal document, properly structured, witnessed by 9 conquered arbiters, and transmitted across every official diplomatic channel simultaneously. Grand Arbiter Drath had composed it himself. It was precise, cold, and absolute. It listed humanity's violations, named the coalition members, and declared the full military authority of 11 species now directed against a single world and its scattered holdings. It was, by every legal standard the conquered recognized, a perfect declaration of war. It triggered the Accord trap at the 44th second. The relay network lit up so fast that monitoring stations across 4 star systems logged it as a hardware fault. Every node fired at once. The package was enormous, 4,000 years of documentation, compressed and authenticated and impossible to intercept, because it was not being sent from one place. It was being sent from everywhere to everywhere at the same time. Every conquered government received it. Every neutral species received it. Every independent station, every border outpost, every listening array pointed even partially at human space received it. It arrived in the inboxes of heads of state, military commanders, trade ministers, and historians simultaneously, labeled simply, for the record. The Volkai communications team saw it happen and did not immediately understand what they were looking at. Their first response was to attempt a block. The block failed because there was nothing to block. The message was not coming through Volkai-controlled infrastructure. Their second response was to attempt a retraction demand. The demand had nowhere to go. Their third response was silence, which lasted approximately 4 minutes before someone in the Grand Arbiter's office started reading the files. What the files contained was not dramatic. It was not emotional. It was simply a ledger, dates and transactions and names and amounts, payments made to conquered arbiters, resource quotas imposed on species that had no legal mechanism to refuse them, survey data from 2 small worlds, once inhabited, now listed in conquered records as uninhabited, trade agreements signed under terms that the signing parties had not been given the full text of in advance. 4,000 years of the Volkai shaping the conquered not through force alone, but through the steady, patient corruption of every system designed to hold them accountable. The first public response came from the Orath. They were the oldest surviving civilization in the conquered, older even than the Volkai, and they had always been quiet. Their elder, a being named San who had lived through 3 prior conquered fractures, read 12 pages of the document before sending a single instruction to the Orath Diplomatic Corps: freeze all Volkai asset transfers pending review. The instruction went out within 6 minutes of the Accord trap firing. The Crethon, an insectoid species who had been a conquered member for 800 years, went quiet for 20 minutes. Then their ambassador filed a public statement citing 3 specific entries in the document. 3 actions the Volkai had taken against the Crethon themselves, buried in conquered records for centuries, now suddenly very visible. The statement ended with the Crethon formally withdrawing from the coalition. 3 other coalition species began contacting Rhea privately within the hour. And then across 7 star systems, the Shepherd fleet woke up. 600 ships did not fire their weapons. They turned on their running lights. They powered their drives to minimum output, just enough to produce a readable signature on any nearby scan. They moved out of the asteroid belt slowly into open space and held position. In each system, they arranged themselves in a loose perimeter around every significant Volkai approach vector. Not threatening, not advancing, simply visible. The effect on Volkai Tactical Command was described later, by one of their own analysts, as being similar to walking into a room you believe to be empty and finding it already occupied by 600 people who had clearly been there for a long time. Grand Arbiter Drath demanded a direct channel to Rhea. She opened it on a shared conquered frequency. Not private, not diplomatic, open to anyone who wanted to listen, and a great many people did. "How did you obtain those files?" Drath said. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that did not have a human name. Rhea was sitting in a small room in the underground facility. She had a cup of water in front of her and a single light above her. She looked entirely unremarkable. "We kept records," she said. "Those records were sealed. They were removed from all Concord archives." "From Concord archives, yes," she said. "We have our own." A pause. "For how long?" "Since before we joined the Concord," she said. "We came in knowing what you were. We kept notes." Another pause. Longer. Rhea waited. She was good at waiting. "You planned this," Drath said. "We planned for the possibility," she said. "There is a difference. We hoped we would never need it. We made sure we would be ready if we did." The channel was open. 42 governments were listening. Drath knew it. Rhea knew it. Everyone knew it. "What do you want?" Drath said finally. "Right now," Rhea said. "Nothing from you. I am waiting for the Oreth to finish reading." She closed the channel. In the Concord monitoring stations, the conversation was already being transcribed, translated, and distributed. In the Volkai Council chamber, 12 advisors were staring at the wall display showing the positions of 600 ships they had not known existed 48 hours ago. Outside, the Accord trap kept broadcasting. It would not stop until every antenna in explored space had received it in full. It had been waiting 183 years for this moment. It was in no hurry now. Of the 3 Volkai fleets that actually advanced, the first one turned back before firing a single shot. The second one engaged. The third one stopped in place and requested emergency communication with the Volkai Council, which was an unusual thing for a fleet of that size to do in the middle of a declared war. What happened to the second fleet is the part that got written about later. Lieutenant Commander Priya Anand was not in command of a large ship. The vessel she commanded, the frigate Relentless, was the kind of ship the Volkai tactical database classified as a light patrol craft, capable, but not a serious threat to a battle group. She had 3 other frigates with her. The Volkai force she was assigned to hold consisted of 20 warships, 2 of them capital class, positioned to punch through the Deva corridor and reach the Ardes system. The Deva corridor was a long, narrow channel of navigable space between 2 dense dust clouds. It was the only clean approach to Ardes. Whoever held the corridor held the gate. Priya held it with 4 ships. She did not do it with firepower. That math did not work, and she knew it. She did it by making the Volkai battle group slow down and then stop, and then start asking questions. Every time a Volkai ship tried to get a clean targeting solution, something interfered. False signatures appearing and disappearing in the dust clouds, transponder echoes that suggested more ships were present than were actually there. Navigational interference sourced to a frequency the Volkai had not used themselves in 200 years, but which they recognized. Because they had invented it, and it was not supposed to be in human hands. Then Priya did the thing that stopped the fleet entirely. She broadcast the battle group's own tactical encryption codes back at them, not as an attack, as a demonstration. The codes changed hourly, and the current codes had only been generated 4 hours ago aboard the Volkai flagship itself. For Priya to have them meant that human intelligence had been inside Volkai command encryption continuously, not just recently, but for long enough to have an automated system retrieving live keys. The Volkai Battle Group commander, a veteran of 6 prior engagements, stopped the advance and opened an emergency channel to the council. His message was short. They are inside our systems. I do not know how far. I am requesting guidance before proceeding. No guidance came quickly enough. By the time the council responded, the window for a clean push through the corridor had passed. The 2 dust clouds on either side had shifted. They always shifted, which was why the corridor was only periodically navigable, and the Volkai fleet was looking at a 6-rotation wait for the next clean window. 6 rotations was a very long time. On Artie's III, the second problem presented itself to the Volkai ground forces that had landed on the outer continent. They had gone in expecting a colony of farmers and light industrial workers. Artie's III had been designated agricultural in Concord Registry for 11 years. The colony had applied for 4 consecutive years of terraforming assistance grants. Their public reports mentioned soil chemistry and water cycling, and almost nothing else. What the ground forces found was that every adult on Artie's III had completed a full military defense certification. The certification was listed in the colony's own records, openly, under the heading Civil Emergency Preparedness, a Concord-approved program that technically every human colony was enrolled in, and that no non-human Concord member had ever reviewed closely enough to understand that the curriculum was, in practical terms, a complete infantry training course. The sealed containers in the colony warehouses, labeled agricultural equipment, contained weapons, armor, and field medical kits. Not black market, not illegal. Concord law permitted member species to maintain civil defense materiel in settled territories. Humanity had been settling territories and filling warehouses for 80 years. The Volkai ground force of 4,000 encountered a colony population of 9,000, every single one of whom knew exactly what to do. The engagement report sent back to Volkai Command contained a line that was later translated and distributed widely. It read, "We are unable to locate the civilian population. It appears there is no civilian population. They are all soldiers." By rotation 4 of the declared war, the situation had shifted in a way that Volkai tactical doctrine had no clean category for. Militarily, they were not losing badly, but they were not winning. They were stuck, held at corridors, stalled at colonies, watching their coalition fracture in real time as more species read the Accord trap files and began making new calculations about old alliances. The Volkai philosopher Esch, one of Drath's senior advisors, presented an analysis to the Council on Rotation 5. He had been reviewing the engagement reports alongside the Accord trap documents and the pre-war intelligence files. He spoke for 20 minutes. His conclusion was not about ships or weapons or strategy. "We made one fundamental error," he said. "We looked at how long humanity had been in space and assumed it measured how long they had been preparing. It does not. They were preparing before they came to space. They were preparing before they knew we existed. They built their entire expansion strategy around the assumption that one day a more powerful civilization would attempt to stop them, and they decided in advance what they would do about it." He paused. "We did not fight a young species. We triggered a plan that was already finished." There was a Volkai word, krathvel. It described the experience of advancing on ground you believed to be empty, and discovering it had been held the entire time. The word had not been used in a military context in over 1,000 years. Esch wrote it at the bottom of his report and underlined it. By rotation 12, 8 of the 11 coalition species had withdrawn. They did not do it loudly. They sent short formal notices through the Concord diplomatic system, cited the tribunal proceedings now being convened by the Orath, and went quiet. 2 of them sent private messages to Rhea that did not appear in any official record. One message said, "We were coerced. The documents prove it. We ask that this be noted." The other said only, "We are sorry." 3 species remained in the coalition, the Volkai, and 2 smaller client races called the Sun and the Dreth, who had been economically bound to Volkai interests for so long that breaking away was not simply a political decision. It was a survival calculation. Their industrial output, their food imports, their medical supply chains, All of it ran through Volkai-controlled infrastructure. They could not leave cleanly, even if they wanted to. Harlan Osai presented the full military assessment to Rhea on Rotation 13. The Shepherd fleet had the Volkai forces contained. The siege platforms had not fired. The ground situation on Artie's III had stabilized in humanity's favor. Every navigable corridor into the core human systems was held. The Volkai were not advancing. They were not retreating either. They were sitting, which was almost the worst position of all. "We can end this now," Harlan said. He laid out the plan in simple terms. The Shepherd fleet moved to engage. The platforms activated. The Volkai forces, already stretched and demoralized, would face a simultaneous action on 7 fronts. Within 6 rotations, we force a total military surrender. The Volkai are finished as a conquered power. The coalition client species detach automatically when the Volkai lose the ability to enforce their economic leverage. Rhea listened to all of it, then she said, "No." Harlan looked at her. "No. We are not going to break them," she said. "We are going to hold them here and go talk to the Orath." He was quiet for a moment. "Rhea, we have them. This is the moment." "This is one moment," she said. "The moment after this one is what we will live in for the next 4,000 years. I would like that moment to be different from the last 4,000 years." She picked up the assessment document and set it aside. "We spent 183 years building something careful. I'm not going to spend the next rotation throwing all of that away because we finally got to the part where we could win badly." She had been in contact with the Orath Elder San for 3 days by that point, and with the Crethon ambassador, and quietly with representatives from 2 of the species that had withdrawn from the coalition. She had not told Harlan because she knew what he would say, and she had needed to think clearly without the argument. What she had built in those 3 days was a document, not a surrender demand, not a list of human requirements. It was called the New Conquered Accords, and it had been written by 7 species together in a shared working document over 72 hours of continuous drafting. Humanity had proposed the structure. The Orath had amended the legal language. The Crethon had added the accountability provisions. The withdrawn coalition species had contributed the economic transition framework for Volkai client races, a framework specifically designed to let the sun and the Dreth detach without collapsing. The accords called for 4 things: full cessation of the war, Volkai reparations paid not to humanity but to the species documented in the accord trap files, a restructured conquered governance model in which no single species could hold more than 2 seats on the Security Council, and all arbitration required a multi-species panel, and a formal permanent seat for humanity on the new council. Rhea presented the document to Grand Arbiter Drath on an open conquered channel on Rotation 14. She did not deliver it as a demand. She delivered it as an offer. "This is the settlement we are prepared to accept," she said. "It requires the Volkai to accept accountability. It does not require them to be destroyed. You still exist after this. You are smaller and watched more carefully, but you exist." Drath did not respond for a long time. When he did, it was not about the accords. He asked one question: "How long did you know?" "Know what specifically?" Rhea said. "That this would happen, that we would eventually do this." She considered the question seriously. 183 years, 4 months, and 11 days, she said. "That is when the contingency doctrine was written. The person who wrote it concluded that a civilization structured the way yours is, holding the kind of power yours holds, would eventually find a reason to try this. It might take a generation. It might take 10. But it would happen." She paused. "So we got ready." A long silence. Then Drath said, in a tone that was not quite anything in the Volkai emotional register but was closest to resignation, "And you said nothing, for all that time. You sat in conquered chambers and smiled and signed documents and said nothing." "We said plenty," Rhea said. "You are not listening to the right things." Drath resigned 2 days later. His successor was a Volkai named Ven, younger, quieter, and apparently the only member of the current Volkai Council who had finished reading the full Accord Trap document before the resignation. Ven reached out to Rhea not on an official channel, but on a standard civilian relay, which surprised her. "I have a question," Ven said. "Go ahead." The contingency doctrine. 183 years ago, the person who wrote it, did they believe it would ever actually be needed? Or did they hope it never would be? Rhea thought about her grandmother, about the construction yard, about a woman who spent her adult life building the first relay node and never once described her work to her family as anything other than communications infrastructure. "Both," she said, "that is a very human thing." Ven was quiet for a moment. Then he said, slowly and carefully, in imperfect but genuine human standard, "I think I am beginning to understand that. 6 months after the new Concord Accords were signed, nobody held a parade. There were ceremonies, but they were quiet things. A flag exchange in the Concord Central Chamber. A formal reading of the new governance structure by representatives of 9 species. A short recorded address by Rhea that most people only half-watched because it was exactly as calm and undramatic as everything else she did. Humanity did not celebrate the way the Volkai had expected a victorious species to celebrate. There were no monuments to the war, no named warships promoted to museum status. The Shepherd fleet returned to its home ports, refueled, and went back to work as a registered Concord Defense Force, now officially listed, no longer a secret, classified as a standard military asset like anyone else's. The siege platforms were decommissioned, and the hardware repurposed for actual weather monitoring, which several colony worlds apparently genuinely needed. The one ceremony that meant something was small and happened on Earth. It was the opening of a new wing of the Concord Archives building, the physical one on Earth, which had been a symbolic gesture when it was built and remained one. The new wing was donated by humanity and held a single collection. The full Accord trap files, declassified, indexed, and made permanently accessible to any Concord member species that wanted to send researchers. Not as a weapon anymore. As a record. As history. Rhea attended without a prepared speech. She walked through the wing, read a few of the placard descriptions, and stood for a while in front of the first entry in the collection. A document dated 4,012 years ago, in Volkai script, recording a payment made to a Concord arbiter in exchange for a favorable ruling on a resource survey. 4,000 years. Someone had kept that document. Someone had passed it to the next person, and that person had passed it forward again, and somewhere in that long chain of hands, the decision had been made to hold it rather than use it, to save it for the right moment, which was also the necessary moment, which was also the moment that had just passed. 3 alien observers gave recorded interviews for the new archive's opening documentation. The Oreth Elder San, who had lived through enough history that she spoke about centuries the way other people spoke about decades, said that humanity was the only species she had encountered in her long life that had won a conflict, without then attempting to define themselves by the winning. They did not want to be conquerors, she said. That is rarer than it should be. Crethon Ambassador, whose species communicated partly through pheromone and partly through carefully constructed formal speech, said the most difficult thing about humanity for non-human species to process was not their weapons or their patience. It was their ability to maintain a collective secret across generations without the secret corroding the people who kept it. A secret held for that long in most species becomes something else. It becomes a grievance. It becomes identity. It becomes a reason. He paused. In humans it remained only a plan. That is a very unusual thing. The former Grand Arbiter Drath, now retired and living in a private residence on the 3rd Volkai home world, submitted a written statement. He did not attend in person. His statement was short. We counted their years and measured their history and calculated their power correctly. We made one error. We forgot that short lives, accumulated across generations, can add up to something very long indeed. We thought we were facing a young civilization. We were facing the sum of every generation that had prepared for us. I do not know how to correct for that. I am not sure it can be corrected for. Perhaps that is the point. Priya Anand was offered a promotion to full commander following the engagement at the Deva corridor. She declined it, signed the paperwork returning to her standard posting, and went back to the Relentless. In her personal log recorded on the first day back aboard her ship, she wrote, "People keep asking what it felt like when the ultimatum came. They expect a complicated answer. The honest one is, it felt like permission. We had been ready for so long. Being told we were allowed to use it was almost a relief. I do not know if that is the right way to feel about a war, but it is the true way." Harlan Oss gave a debrief to the Defense Council 3 months after the accords were signed. The debrief was classified at first and later, in edited form, made public. The Council asked him what the real cost of the contingency doctrine had been, not the financial figure, which was calculable, but the human cost of carrying a plan across 183 years in silence. Harlan took a long time to answer. "Every person who built something and could not describe their work to their family," he said finally. "Every ambassador who sat in a room and smiled through an insult, knowing exactly what was parked in the asteroid belt behind them and not being able to say so. Every generation that inherited the plan and the obligation to maintain it and chose to do so anyway." He stopped. "We asked ordinary people to be patient and to trust that it mattered. Not one generation, 6 or 7 of them. And they said yes every time." He looked at the table. "I think that is the part that no other species has quite been able to process. Not the ships, not the files. That we could ask that of ordinary people across that kind of time and they kept saying yes." On Artie's III, one of the 3 colony worlds the Volkai had demanded humanity surrender, the worlds that had started the whole chain. A class of children was sitting outside on a warm afternoon. Their teacher was explaining the recent history, the ultimatum, the smile, the war that had lasted 11 weeks and ended with a library donation. A girl in the back row was only half listening because she was planting something in the soil near her feet, a seed of some kind, pushed carefully into the dirt with one finger. She looked up when the teacher got to the part about the smile. "Why did she smile?" the girl asked. "When she read the bad message, why did she smile?" The teacher thought about it for a moment. Several answers were technically correct. She chose the one that was most true. "Because the question had already been answered," the teacher said. "A long time ago, by a lot of people. She was just the one who got to find out." The girl looked at the small hole in the dirt where she had placed the seed. Then she covered it over carefully and patted the soil flat. That evening, Rhea wrote the last entry in her journal for that year. It was one line. "They called it a war. We had another word for it. We called it proof."